Hello, my friends. It is Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. I'm back after 5 days. I was at my mother's funeral, and so I just was not paying attention to what was going on here. I was being with family as I should be. The upside of that is that I'm going to show you the last 5 days because I was catching up myself just to show you what the trend line looks like. And my voice largely came back. I had that cough that I couldn't really shake, but wasn't really talking a whole lot over the last 5 days. Okay, so here we are, 1,280 Russians off the battlefield. That is on February 21st. Now, I'm going to show you two things for the last 5 days, for each of the last 5 days. 1280, 143. Then on the 22nd, 1140, also quite low, 139, quite high. And then the next day, 1180, quite low, 91, reasonably high. And then 1050 on February 24th, quite low, 110, still on the high side. And then 1300 on February 25th, that's yesterday, 138, quite high. 1170 and 120. So what we're seeing is all throughout February, and I just plugged these numbers into my own spreadsheet just this morning, still at 1,266, which is 300 or so less than the previous few months. So the casualties are still down, and the hitting of vehicles and fuel tanks is still quite high. And I think that's clearly attributed to drones. Why drones are able to do more, if it's just a number of drones or if it's because the assaults have reduced, I don't quite understand. Okay, Russia launched 177 Shahed drones, of which 110 were shot down, another 66 suppressed by electronic warfare, but it still has an effect. So a journalist, Tetiana Kulyk, and her husband, a well-known surgeon, Pavlo Ivanchov, were killed by a Russian attack on Kyiv last night. Remember, there were 177 drones, 110 shot down, but 66 suppressed by electronic warfare. That brings us almost up to the total, except suppressed doesn't mean that it's not doing any damage. Suppressed simply means that it's not going where it's going and it's kind of fly somewhere. Well, what happened here was a Russian Shahed drone flew directly into the bedroom of their house. Neighbors tried to save the couple. The fire spread too quickly. And wow. Okay, so when you see what happens to an individual or a couple of people, it almost hits harder than when you see something like, well, I'll come back to this, like this. The massacre of Mariupol estimates that Russians killed anywhere from 30,000 to 120. When you look at 30,000 to 120,000, it's overwhelming. It becomes almost clinical, like a statistic, and you don't really feel the pain of that. Although, I mean, this is terrible. It's a tragedy, but you don't feel it nearly as intensely as you do when you just look at, like, these human beings are no longer with us, and it's deeply tragic. Russia's piece hit Kharkiv as well last night. Homes, a theater, a cafe, a university destroyed. People were hospitalized. How could anyone consider diplomacy with Russia after all this? And yet they are. Now, yesterday when I got back, I was home for about 20 minutes, pulled some stuff out of the van into the house and said, like, let me sit down and think about and explain some of the things I've been thinking about. The entire way back, yesterday, I was listening to articles, and I'm really amazed by how hard just this kind of tragedy, just when you can see the humans involved, really hit you, as opposed to, like, when you're looking at this Mariupol scenario, 30,000 to 120,000. You know it, but you don't really feel it in the same way. And like, there's a theory. I was talking to a friend of mine, another professor, who has a theory that the Russians aren't going to negotiate and give up these territories because you're going to be horrified by what you see behind these territories. That in these four oblasts, it'd be like a North Korean or an East Berlin or East Germany kind of scenario. Okay, let's keep going. Last night, there was also a massive Ukrainian drone attack that targeted Kuban and occupied Crimea in Tuapse, Tuapse. I'm just mispronouncing that, I'm sure. Reports mentioned 40 explosions. It's home to a seaport and an oil refinery previously hit in the summer. Blasts were also heard in Sevastopol. Russians claim to have shot down 128 drones, but the full impact of the raid remains unknown. A little bit more about that. They damaged an ELOU 8VT-12 unit and a crude oil pipeline, causing a spill. And there were a lot of explosions reported. The Russians claimed that they shot down 128 drones or something like that. So, but you can't really tell by their reports. Okay, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces eliminated a platoon of Russian forces during a raid on an industrial complex in the Donetsk sector. One Russian was captured and revealed the location of his unit and ammo depots, and these arsenals were destroyed the same day. So that was an upside. But again, here, what Ukraine is going after are oil complexes and soldiers and ammunition depots, and that's very different than, you know, a drone going through someone's bedroom while they're sleeping at night, a civilian. In the cross direction, 26 assaults, and this is what you expect. You see these very low numbers. When you see these numbers here, there's somehow a weird correlation between that and these very low assault numbers. They really just don't have the oomph to keep going. Now, Russians are no longer able to attack as they once were, with assaults now in their lowest in 3 months, down 67% since December high. And again, like, it's not weird that there's lower casualties and only 26 assaults. The weird thing is what's causing this. Like, why are the assaults down? But we do know that they're down. This is the blue line here is February, and this is the same chart on either side. One's just in English. The red line is in January, and the yellow line is in December. It's markedly down, like significantly down from what it has been historically. And now we look at this. Russian losses over the full-scale war year to year. The Ukrainian army makes the invader pay the highest price for their invasion. So the first year is in this light tan, the small on the right-hand side of this, right? Light tan, light tan, light tan. Okay, so this is artillery systems and tanks and armored vehicles and personnel losses. And then the darker tan is the second year. You're for personnel losses, you're not quite to half yet. For vehicles, you're certainly not to half yet. Many more tanks by first and second year than in the third. Artillery systems, you're not the half, and armored vehicles, you're a little bit more than half. But in the third year, half the losses for Russia came within the third year for casualties. That's really amazing. First and second year combined is about the same as a third year worth of Russian casualties. And same with vehicles, it's not even quite to that. And it's so, and I would attribute this to more drone attacks, and I think that's what's going on here. Okay, there's also 17 casualties for every square kilometer occupied. Think about that. Every square kilometer that Russia has occupied, it costs 17 casualties, the blood price of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's something to think about. Here, contract soldiers now bear the brunt of Russia's invasion. So contracts in red, unknown is in blue, regular forces in green, prisoners in blue. Now look at the prisoners in the high, right? Now all of them were high at this point, but prisoners particularly took the brunt here during Wagner. PMC is over here as well, mobilized. Okay, so mobilized are down here. Now Jay and Kiev summarize this really well. Russia's original invading army was actually military, then mostly liquidated, then prisoners in Wagner, also liquidated. Now relying on Russian greed, men willing to murder people in Ukraine for money, to cancel debts, to buy an apartment or a car. That's what the contract soldiers are men that are willing to go to Ukraine to murder people that they don't know in order to, get paid. It's really interesting. Okay, let's look at a little bit of just political news. This is the British Prime Minister.
Our national security faces a critical moment. That is why we are increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP from April 2027, the biggest sustained increase since the Cold War.
Yeah, so that's good. I'm glad they're doing it. Some countries aren't over the 2% border yet. Okay, so opening the border between Finland and Russia is not realistic, the Finnish defense minister has said. We are not going to open the border. We know that Russia wants to continue directing the flow of migrants into Finland immediately. Yeah, they weaponize everything. I mean, that's just how they roll, including migrants. We must take common security seriously, whether it's border security or cables or real estate deals. We need to strengthen control in these areas. Trust has been lost because Russia attacked Ukraine and issued ultimatums to all of Europe. Yep, that's right. That's exactly what's happened. Now, Turkey is announcing, well, Ukraine and Turkey are getting together. They're announcing reconstruction tenders as early as May. Kyiv has handed Turkey a dossier of projects to rebuild the country. So, yeah, the Turkish have an interest in making money by doing this sort of thing. Now, the question is who's going to pay for it? If you get the peace agreement done right, Russia should pay for what Russia broke. Another article saying it's about a half a trillion estimate. I saw a half a trillion as an estimate from, I thought, the World Bank. I might have my source wrong, but this was like almost half a year ago or longer. And so it seems like it's more than half a trillion in rebuilding costs, let alone the deaths and the human recuperations. But yeah, they're thinking about this, and that's a positive thing. Okay, Putin is an animal and a dictator, says a U.S. Senator. Tom Suozzi voiced a strong support for Ukraine, rejecting any appeasement. Meanwhile, the NSA's John Bolton slammed Trump, saying that he has switched sides in the Russia-Ukraine war, calling it a huge embarrassment and warning that failing to see Moscow's threat to NATO is outrageous. Let's hear what the senator
A
says.
very simple message. It shouldn't be necessary, but we have to be very clear. Putin is a dictator. Zelensky is not. Zelensky was elected by 73% of the voters in Ukraine, an election that was certified by the European Commission that certifies it was in fact a free and fair election. Very simple point that we need it to be reported regularly. Putin is a dictator. Zelensky is not. Putin and the Russians invaded Ukraine, not the other way around.
How we just don't have this moral clarity, I can't understand. I mean, I really just, there's got to be something else here to the picture that I'm missing. And don't put in the comments, well, Putin has blackmail on Trump. We just don't know. If he does and it comes out, then we'll talk about that. But in the meantime, I can't see how you can have an ethical system that would allow us not to see that very point, that Putin's a dictator, Zelensky's not. Putin invaded Ukraine. Zelensky didn't invade Russia. Like, that wasn't what happened. Okay. Here, Steve Rosenberg. Putin and Trump are close in ideology and values. Putin is his natural ally. This is according to Russian newspapers. Let's hear what it has to say.
What is it about Vladimir Putin and Russia that attract Donald Trump? Well, in this week's edition of Arguments and Facts, a political scientist says Putin and Trump are close in ideology and values. Russia continues down the path of defending conservative values. This has brought us many allies in the West, including America, where Trump began his presidency by cancelling the liberal agenda.
But those aren't the same liberal values or conservative values. They're very different in kind. Conservative values in the United States look nothing like Russian autocracy. That's not the point. But Putin goes out of his way to make it look like we're all on the same page. And then someone like a Tucker Carlson will amplify that kind of message.
In other words, on the question of values, America's president differs hugely from Western elites, and Putin is his natural ally.
Okay, so Trump differs from the elites. That's absolutely true. But Putin's values are not the same.
Then he adds, there's the question of money. The Americans are very interested in economic cooperation with Russia.
Now, I think that answers the question a little bit more, that it's economic. What kind of deals they could make with Russia if this actually got sorted out in some kind of way where they could make these deals. That, I think, is more explanatory. We'll come back to more of that later on in three big stories. Okay, last couple things. 11 years ago, as Ukrainians fought for freedom, Russia launched its war by invading Ukraine. On 26 February 2014, thousands protested to stop Putin's takeover. The next day, little green men seized government buildings, beginning the occupation that continues today. That was 3 years ago, or 11 years ago today, in Crimea on February 26th, 2014. Last little bit, some of you keep asking me about how many donkeys are, and when we look at the charts, like when we look at these day-over-day charts, how many donkeys have been accounted for. I think if you're using donkeys, you're not doing that great accounting. I mean, I'm just speculating. This is how I'm thinking about it. So I haven't seen any charts about lost donkeys, but when you're down to donkeys, yeah. Okay, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.